Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight. This week, we will dedicate our In Focus conversations to the various elements of growth in Utah. We've talked about agriculture and transportation, and we'll address drought and housing next. But tonight, our focus is on air quality. Kicking off our conversation tonight is Jason Brown, Vice President of Education and Communications for Envision Utah. Jason, thanks for being here tonight and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Rosie. Happy to be here.
Jason, Envision Utah says that the air in Utah is actually getting better, believe it or not. What's behind the downward trend in unhealthy pollution levels, and could the state's growth threaten that?
That's a really great question. So the logical thing for us to think is that Utah is growing, and we're growing because we're a great place to live, but we think that because we're growing, the pollution is just going to keep getting worse and worse, but that's not what we've seen happen. In fact, our air is cleaner today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. We even have less than half the pollution per day now than we did 20 years ago, and our population is much bigger than that. And there are really two reasons that our air quality has gotten better. The first of those is we've adopted cleaner technologies. The biggest one being cars. Cars today are just so much cleaner than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So newer cars on the road, other technologies like cleaner water heaters, cleaner furnaces, cleaner technologies in manufacturing, all these things have helped. And then in addition to technology, we've made a lot of really good clean air decisions, both as individuals and as a larger community. You can look at our public transportation, for instance. Front Runner takes 1.5 lanes worth of cars off the road every morning and every night. We're also a lot better at doing things like not idling than we used to be. So those clean air decisions. All this, though, comes with a big but, and that is our air quality has gotten better, but if we don't continue to adopt those cleaner technologies and we don't continue to make those good clean air decisions, then eventually our population will catch up and the trend in air quality will reverse and it will start to get worse again.
So we have to keep up these good habits in order to maintain that clean air. But Jason, we still get spikes of bad air days. Could you help us recap what causes that bad air and what's in it?
Of course, yeah. There's probably there's really three clean air issues that we deal with, or air pollution issues that we deal with. The first, and maybe the most infamous, is our winter inversions, and we've learned about those. That's when we have sort of this lid of hot air over our valleys that traps cool air down below. But it's not just the cool air that it traps. It traps emissions from our cars or from our snow blowers or from our fireplaces, and all those emissions that get trapped in the air in the winter mix and they become that pollution that we see, that ugly brown pollution. We call that PM 2.5, and it's actually small enough on a particle level to get into our lungs and our bloodstream and cause problems there. So that's our winter problem. And then in the summer we have an ozone problem, which is kind of the opposite. The air gets so hot that all the emissions that we have from our cars or lawnmowers or other things mix and become ozone, which when ozone is down in the air that we breathe, that can also become unhealthy and be a problem. And then the third big pollution problem that we have is what we've been experiencing a lot lately, which is wildfires. And sometimes it's our own wildfires here in the state that are causing problems. And sometimes, like lately, we've been dealing with wildfire smoke that's blowing in from other states. And a lot of the smoke has that same PM 2.5 that we deal with in the winter, but so it creates that gross brown haze that we don't like to look at and is also really unhealthy for us.
Wow, it's a problem we can't escape no matter what time of year it is. Jason, where do you see our emission sources coming from the future years to come?
Well, that is a really great question and a really important one. For the near future, for maybe the next decade or so, our biggest source of pollution is going to be the cars and trucks that we drive. That's what it is today, and that's what we see for at least the next 10 years or so, that cars and trucks are the biggest problem. So the things that we could do the sooner we can get cleaner cars on the road and get rid of our older, more polluting cars, the better. And but as we look long term, it actually switches, and our homes and our businesses become the biggest source of pollution long term. And if you think about it, every home, almost every home, has two little flames going all the time. It's your furnace and your hot water heater. And those little flames, in a single home aren't much, but year after year, in every home along the Wasatch Front and across the state, that really adds up to a lot of pollution. So as technology for cars improves and as we get cleaner and cleaner vehicles and electric vehicles on the roads, cars will be less of a problem, and we'll really need to focus on making sure that our homes and our businesses are as clean as possible and reduce emissions from those as much as possible.
Yeah, start thinking about going green now and all the different ways that you can do it, whether you're in your house or out of your house. Jason, what are some things that already have been done in our state to improve long-term air quality, and what are some short-term things that Utahns can do to help minimize that impact?
Well, I mentioned some of the great things that have happened. Like I said, public transportation has been really helpful. We have rules about what water heaters can be sold in the state now, so that water heaters are much cleaner, 70% cleaner now than they were just 5 years ago. And in terms of short-term things we can do, driving and reducing emissions from driving is really the most important short-term thing we can do. And that comes down to what you drive, having the cleanest car possible. Even if it's not an electric car, newer cars are much, much cleaner. And then it's what we put into those cars. We can get gas that's actually a lot cleaner. It's called Tier 3 gas, and it's available at most major brand name gas stations across the state. And it's how much we drive. If we can reduce our own driving habits, maybe by telecommuting when we can, or walking or biking when we can, and building our communities and structuring our communities so that we can walk and bike and take public transportation more easily, that will help. So short term, think clean driving as much as possible.
All right, you've been hearing from Jason Brown, Vice President of Education and Communications for Envision Utah. Jason, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on growth in Utah air quality. Up next in our conversation is Dr. Daniel Mendoza, Research Assistant Professor of Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Utah. Daniel, it's great to have you back. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Rosie.
Now, Daniel, you study air quality in regards to urban development. Generally, what do you find common in all cities?
Well, what we're seeing is an explosive growth here in Utah. We're seeing, for example, how we're going to be essentially doubling our population by 2050. So there are many factors that we've been looking at, and it's really whether we're going to be developing in a way that is more conducive to lowering our emissions, our footprint, and therefore trying to make it much more sustainable for us and really for our children and our children's children.
Now let's talk about Utah. We've had some bad air quality along the Wasatch Front. What makes our cities unique for the bad air?
Well, we do have one substantial problem, particularly during the summer, which are the wildfires. Now, many of them are not actually local to us. Many of them really originate on our western states, California, Washington, and Oregon. And the problem is because of the prevailing wind conditions, all of that smoke tends to really accumulate really on our side on the Intermountain West. So we see those elevated values, such as what we saw a couple of weeks ago where we had the worst air quality followed by Denver. And again, our geography also plays a substantial role. If we think about the Wasatch Mountains as sort of a wall, then what happens is the air actually gets trapped, similar to our wintertime inversions in a sense that as the wildfire smoke is coming in, some of it can stay trapped, and then we basically live in a bowl here in the Wasatch Front. And so because of that, once pollution comes in, it's sometimes harder for it to leave.
What do you find in more rural areas that are also growing, like St. George or Logan?
So one thing that we find is that in rural areas, we do have elevated ozone levels. Now, ozone is something that we are really, although we've been studying it for a while, it has not generally been a huge area of concern. However, as our summers get hotter, as we have brighter days essentially, and as we have more emissions, then ozone is becoming a larger and larger problem. I would like to argue that wintertime inversions may actually become less of a factor in our poor air quality, and they will actually be supplanted and surpassed by our summer elevated ozone levels, in addition to increases in wildfires that we've been seeing for the past 20 to 30 years.
Daniel, is there a proper way to grow to help the air quality?
Well, as much as I like to be an optimist, the answer is really no. Because imagine if all of a sudden, let's say, you and I, we cut our emissions by 30% each, but then all of a sudden one more person appears. Well, that person will all of a sudden negate all of those effects. Now, there are solutions to decrease the impact, but really the population growth is what's going to be one of the largest drivers. Especially, and there are multiple levels to look at this. It's obviously a person needs X amount of energy, X amount of transportation, etc. But as we're growing and our cities are growing larger and larger and commutes get longer and longer, that's where we're seeing increases in emissions, more traffic congestion, which really is, at least at this moment, our largest source of emissions.
Now, looking forward at 2050 or whenever the population of Utah doubles, what do you expect of the air quality if we continue on our current path?
I think one thing that we really need to understand is that we are reducing our, say, per capita energy footprint. There are more efficient vehicles or lower emitting vehicles, furnaces, for example. Things are getting better. However, we also have to realize that there's more demand for this. I think that cleaner technologies are definitely, they're no longer on the horizon, they're right here, and many people are adopting them. So I think in terms of what we emit, we are doing a really great job, and we're getting much better. One of the problems, though, that it's much more difficult to really tame and to control are the effects of nature. And by that I mean specifically wildfires and dust storms. While we keep talking about air quality in a more sort of fossil fuel way, we also got to understand that the wildfires are a large part of the equation, and also right here in our own backyard, the Great Salt Lake, as it's drying up, that dust is getting picked up and it's increasing the amount of storms, and actually it's picking up a fair amount of some toxic chemicals that we really should not be digging up. So those are things that we really need to consider when we're looking at this, because they're all part of the equation.
Daniel, what do we need to be thinking about and considering changing if we want to keep our air cleaner?
I think that what we need to really think about is how we as individuals can affect change, how we can really change behavior. I think that it's important to, for example, take into account warnings such as poor air quality up ahead, and then we can start to carpool, reduce our trips, consider teleworking, consider taking public transit to try to really do what we can as individuals. Small, really behavioral changes, not idling, trying to be really as energy safe and energy really minimizing our footprint, because we as individuals have a lot of power. Many people just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, well, this is a larger problem, and they point, for example, at industry or larger point sources. However, those are regulated, and there's significant effort in trying to reduce the emissions from these sources, but really it's the public. If we all of us Utahns think about how we can make change in our own neighborhood, in our backyard, that's going to make a large impact, and especially that's going to be felt in our own neighborhoods and our own homes.
We really need to change that collective mindset. You've been hearing from Dr. Daniel Mendoza, Research Assistant Professor of Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Utah. And Daniel, thank you so much for joining us again tonight to provide your insight.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on growth in Utah air quality. Rounding out our conversation tonight is Kim Frost, Executive Director for UCARE, which stands for the Utah Clean Air Partnership. And Kim, thanks for your time tonight. It's great to have you here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Kim, we've had some bad air quality as of late, and while the weather patterns and the wildfire smoke has been a large factor, ozone also plays a role. Can you help us understand ozone a little bit more? How is it caused, and how common is it in the Utah summers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we have seen a lot of issues with wildfires this summer. They have come from California as well as from Utah. But one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand is that in addition to wildfires, we do have a summer ozone problem. And basically what that is it's the same type of pollution that's coming out of our cars and from our different buildings and homes, and that's combining with really hot air and sunshine, and then that traps it in the valley, and we see that it becomes an issue because it's staying closer to the ground, basically right where we're breathing.
And what are some of the health concerns surrounding ozone?
Yeah, so like winter inversion, we see a lot of the same health impacts, pulmonary issues, cardiovascular issues. People with asthma are at a greater risk for impacts. So we've heard physicians refer to it basically as a sunburn on your lungs.
Oh, wow. That's quite the analogy there.
Yes, it is.
So knowing that ozone can cause essentially a sunburn on your lungs, what can we do to slow ozone production?
Yeah, well, while there are some major health impacts, the good news is that we as individuals can take action to try to be part of the solution. So we really encourage people to drive less, to carpool, to take public transit, to be idle free, because all of those things are impacting our air quality and specifically our summer ozone. So we encourage people to be part of the solution.
So Kim, the theme of all of our segments this week is growth. So of course I have to throw a growth question in here. Since Utah is growing so quickly, the fastest in the country, how does that growth affect ozone and its inherent problems?
Yeah, so while it does, we are impacted by the growth, obviously, it's an issue. We also feel like there is, that the growth can be part of the solution to some of our air quality issues. So one of our partners, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, has put out the Wasatch Regional Choice Vision, and that talks about how we can grow in smart ways to try to impact our air quality and to lessen our pollution. And one of the ways that they're talking about that we could do that is by having smaller communities. So really shrinking the footprint and having communities that have everything that we need within, a 5 to 15 mile hub. So that means, within the proximity of our homes, we have our jobs, we have our shopping, all of the amenities that we need. And we have found that by doing that, we could reduce our pollution and our emissions by 59% over the next 30 years.
Yeah, it's really all about land use. We actually had the council on the show last night, and we were talking about this new term that's coming about with all these new developing communities where you can work, eat, play, and live all at the same time to, like you said, reduce that travel time that it takes from your house to work and then the grocery store and then your kids to school. And so definitely something to think about, right, as we're expanding and growing as well in the state. So we know growth is something that your organization has been thinking about for a while. So let's talk about some of the strategies that you've all implemented to help improve air quality.
Yeah, so we are really an organization that encourages individuals, again, to be part of the solution. In the summer months, you can turn up your thermostat, and that will lessen your pollution. In the winter months, you turn it down. Really thinking about air quality as a year-round issue that we all need to be aware of. We as individuals can make small changes that will have a large collective impact.
Yeah, not only does turning your thermostat or adjusting it help with the pollution in the air, but it also brings your bill down. So there's other perks to it as well, right?
There's definitely economic impacts as well with gas prices going up. The less that we drive, the more money that we save and the better our air quality is going to be.
Right, there's other incentives there too. Kim, what other things do you recommend to Utahns who want to have cleaner air?
Yeah, we just encourage you to think about growth in your own communities. Another way that we can really be part of the solution is to think about teleworking. So that's something that we've seen over the last year and a half as we've gone through the pandemic. We saw what a huge impact teleworking can have on our air quality. And so as we are, cautiously going back to our offices and starting to go back to our jobs, let's think about ways that we can telework to help improve the air. And that might mean being aware of our air quality forecast, and then on days where it's forecasted that we'll have poor air quality, consider teleworking.
What we've been discussing during these segments is if there was any silver lining from the pandemic is that we learned how to telework. Some of us were forced to learn how to telework, and in return, less cars were on the road, and we saw how much cleaner our air got. And so we know it's something that's possible. We know it's something that we could strive for. And then we sort of got a glimpse of the positive impact that it had. But at the end of the day, the hardest part is changing people's behavior. So what is your pitch to people as to why they should consider changing their habits?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of reasons why we should change our habit. One of them is for health reasons. The other is for being a part of the solution and helping be a part of your community. And again, I'll just stress that those small changes by a lot of different individuals can have a huge collective impact. And that's where we're going to see things change for our air quality.
Yeah, that's some food for thought there. And Kim, before I let you go, just want to ask you like how you got into this line of work and what makes you so passionate about what you do.
Yeah, actually I have a history of economic development, and so we were recruiting businesses to move to the state of Utah, and we realized that it was an issue for people that were coming to the state. We wanted to make sure that we could address that with our incoming workforce, and also as we grow, think about that growth in positive ways that it could really help our community. And so that's why it's so important that as we look at growing, and you know, Utah is the best state to do business in the country, but let's also make it the cleanest and the healthiest for our workforce.
And it's also one of the best places for outdoor recreation. So as you spend time outside, you don't want to be breathing in bad air all the time. And for some people, you can just wake up and you can sense or you can feel. For me, sometimes I can wake up and I can tell when it's a bad air day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we want to be able to get out and recreate, to enjoy the mountains and enjoy everything that Utah has to offer. It's one of the reasons why we all love to be here. And so in order to have that freedom to be able to go outside, we have to be part of the solution, and we have to be thinking about ways that we can help to clear our air.
You've been hearing from Kim Frost, Executive Director for UCARE, which stands for the Utah Clean Air Partnership. And Kim, thanks for being here. We appreciate you for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you.
And don't forget, we'd love to hear from you about the show. We invite you to join our Facebook group by searching for ABC4 In Focus, or you can send us an email, infocus@abc4.com.